Have you ever wondered, like, if you were alive during World War II,
Yeah.
how you would have reacted, to everything that was going on?
It's a fascinating question.
Today, we're going to do a deep dive into a story from that era, a story of courage, resilience, and really an incredible rescue effort.
Yeah.
It's the story of Nicholas Winton, the man who orchestrated the escape of hundreds of children from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia.
He's often called the British Schindler.
Yeah. And we're going to be using a Dan Snow History Hit podcast episode as our kind of guide through this story.
Sounds good.
And we're also going to hear from two kinder transport survivors who share their firsthand experiences. So it's a story that I think really speaks to the power of like an individual to make a difference even when like the world is kind of falling apart around them.
Right.
So to set the stage a little bit, the year is 1938. The shadow of Nazi Germany is growing. And for Jewish families in Czechoslovakia, the world is changing in some very terrifying ways.
Exactly. And our story actually begins in a really unexpected way. Nicholas Winton was a young British stockbroker. He was planning a ski trip to Switzerland.
Just a simple vacation.
Exactly, a vacation.
Yeah.
And then he gets this phone call that changes everything. A friend of his in Prague urges him to come to Czechoslovakia instead.
Oh, wow.
Because the situation for Jews there was becoming increasingly dire. This is right after the Munich Agreement, which had just ceded a large part of Czechoslovakia to Germany,
Right.
leaving a lot of Jewish families feeling trapped and really vulnerable.
Yeah.
So instead of hitting the slopes, Winton finds himself in Prague, and he sets up a makeshift office in his hotel room.
Wow. Talk about a change of plans.
Right. He starts meeting with these desperate families, compiling lists of children who could potentially be sent to safety in Britain.
So at this point, had the British government agreed to take in refugees, or how is that all working?
So they had agreed to accept unaccompanied refugee children, but the process was so bureaucratic and slow. And Winton, seeing the urgency of the situation, knew he had to act fast.
Yeah.
He really was racing against time.
Wow.
He had to secure exit visas, find foster families in Britain, arrange transportation, all while navigating this really complex web of politics and rising anti-Semitism.
It's hard to imagine the pressure he must have been under.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, was it just him doing all this, or did he have people helping him?
He did. He had a small team of volunteers.
Okay.
But they were also working with limited resources, and they had to raise a significant amount of money because each child required a guarantee of £50
Oh, wow.
to ensure that they wouldn't become a financial burden on Britain.
I see.
So it was a huge undertaking, but Winton was relentless.
And it sounds like he was successful.
He was incredibly successful.
Wow.
He and his team managed to organize 8 trains that transported 669 children from Prague to London between March and August of 1939.
Wow. So these trains filled with children leaving behind everything they knew, heading towards an uncertain future. But hopefully a safer one.
Exactly, and it's heartbreaking to think that for many of those families, those train departures were the last time they saw their children.
Yeah.
A 9th train was actually scheduled for September 1st,
Oh, wow.
carrying 250 more children, but it was tragically halted when World War II broke out.
Oh, my gosh.
Those children so close to escaping were trapped.
Yeah.
Most of them perished in the Holocaust.
It's a stark reminder of, the urgency, the importance of what he had accomplished.
Absolutely.
And what's remarkable to me is that all of this that he did went largely unnoticed for decades.
He didn't seek any recognition or anything. He just kind of went on with his life after the war.
Wow.
And then in 1988, a researcher discovered his scrapbook filled with photos and documents detailing the entire rescue operation.
Oh, wow.
That's when everything changed.
Wow.
He was invited to appear on this BBC television program called That's Life.
Okay.
He thought he was just going to be interviewed, but the producers had a surprise in store for him.
Oh.
The audience was filled with adults who, as children, had been saved by his action.
Oh, my goodness.
Can you imagine that? Decades later, being surrounded by all these people whose lives you helped save?
Yeah,
It must have been incredibly emotional.
I can only imagine.
Winton, clearly moved, was finally recognized for his incredible courage.
Yeah.
He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 1988 and continued to receive honors throughout his life.
Wow.
He passed away peacefully in 2015 at the age of 106.
Wow, what an incredible life.
Amazing.
So to bring this story even more to life, let's talk about a film called One Life, which really shines a light on Winton's actions.
Okay.
It stars Anthony Hopkins as the older Winton and Johnny Slynn as his younger self.
Oh, cool.
And it also features Helena Bonham Carter as Winton's mother-baby.
Okay.
Now, what's really interesting is that Bonham Carter has a personal connection to this story.
Oh, really?
Her own family has a history of helping Jews escape Nazi persecution,
Oh, wow.
which I think adds like this very personal layer to her performance.
Yeah.
And Dan Snow actually interviewed Bonham Carter for his podcast.
Okay.
And she shared some really interesting insights about her family and how it influenced her decision to take on this role.
Interesting.
So, for instance, her great-grandmother was an Austrian Jew who had to flee to Britain in the early 1900s to escape rising anti-Semitism.
Wow.
And then her grandmother, along with other family members, actively helped Jews escape the Nazis during the war.
It seems like helping others was like deeply ingrained in her family.
Yeah, and they were committed to it, even at great risk to themselves.
Wow.
Now, in the film One Life, there's this really powerful scene where Bonham Carter's character confronts a British civil servant about the plight of the Jewish refugees.
Okay.
And she gives this really impassioned speech. She's basically challenging this bureaucrat to like show some compassion and to uphold human decency.
Wow.
And Bonham Carter actually mentioned in the interview that she really channeled the spirit of her own ancestors when she delivered that speech,
Oh, wow.
which I think gave it this extra level of authenticity.
Yeah, for sure.
And she also talked about the dynamic between Nicholas Winton and his mother,
Okay.
and how they were very much partners in this whole endeavor.
Interesting.
So you see in the film how Winton's mother was this driving force behind the scenes,
Yeah.
encouraging him to keep going even when things felt completely overwhelming.
It sounds like she was kind of like the unsung hero of the story.
Yeah, I think so. So she was handling logistics, contacting potential foster families, providing that really unwavering support to her son.
Yeah.
Now, to really understand the impact of Winton's actions, we need to hear from those who were directly affected, the Kindertransport survivors.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And so we're going to shift our focus now to two men, Herman Rothman and Henry Glantz.
Okay.
They, as children, found refuge in Britain thanks to Winton's efforts.
Wow.
And these interviews were actually recorded at Greenwich Castle in North Wales, which has a really interesting connection to the Kindertransport.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
So Greenwich Castle served as a temporary home for many of the Kindertransport children, including Herman and Henry.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't luxurious by any means,
Yeah.
but it did provide shelter and a sense of community for these children who had been through so much.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. So let's start with Herman Rothman's story. He was just 15 years old when he left Germany,
Wow.
barely a teenager. And his escape was prompted by the escalating persecution of Jews, which really hit home when his own father was imprisoned in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp.
So to understand the urgency of his situation, it's important to remember that by the late 1930s, the Nazi regime had enacted a whole series of laws targeting Jews,
Right.
stripping them of their rights, subjecting them to violence and intimidation.
It's chilling to think about what it must have been like to be a teenager witnessing all of this.
Yeah.
The fear, the uncertainty, this sense of being trapped in this nightmare.
Absolutely.
So Herman, like so many others, found himself in a very desperate situation.
And his parents, wanting to save him, had to make this agonizing decision to send him away.
Yeah.
Imagine the heartbreak of putting your child on a train, not knowing if you'll ever see them again.
I can't even imagine. It's a testament to the strength and the desperation of these families.
It really is.
So Herman arrived in Britain with very little carrying the weight of worry for his family left behind.
Yeah.
He ended up at Greenwich Castle, which, although far from luxurious, offered a sense of safety and community.
Did he talk about what it was like being there?
He did. He described it as this chaotic but welcoming environment filled with children from all walks of life, each carrying their own stories of loss and displacement.
Wow.
It was a true melting pot of languages, cultures, and experiences.
Yeah.
And despite the trauma that he endured, Herman found solace in music.
Oh, wow.
He formed an orchestra at the castle, gathering other young musicians to create these moments of beauty amidst all the uncertainty.
That's really remarkable.
It really shows the power of art,
Yeah.
to heal and to provide comfort in times of adversity.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, but his story doesn't end there. As he got older, he felt this strong desire to contribute to the fight against Nazi tyranny.
Oh, wow. So he wanted to fight back.
Yeah, and so driven by a sense of duty and a thirst for justice, he volunteered for the British Army.
Wow.
and he was assigned to the intelligence corps,
Okay.
where his language skills and cultural understanding were really invaluable.
Yeah.
He ended up becoming an interrogator,
Wow.
tasked with questioning high-ranking German officials, including those captured after the war.
It's hard to fathom the weight of that responsibility,
Mhm.
facing the very individuals who orchestrated such horrors.
Yeah, it really speaks to
Mm.
his resilience and strength of character,
Yeah.
that he was able to confront his past in this way.
Yeah.
It wasn't about revenge, but about seeking understanding, trying to grasp the motivations and mindsets of those who had perpetrated these atrocities.
And his work gave him a unique window into the inner workings of the Nazi regime.
Yeah. And in kind of a twist of fate, Herman was actually involved in the discovery and translation of Hitler's last will and testament.
Oh, wow. Are you serious?
He was woken up early one morning and handed a document that had been found sewn into the pocket of a captured German officer.
Imagine the weight of that moment.
I know.
Realizing that you hold in your hands the final words of a man who had caused so much suffering
Yeah.
and destruction.
It was a chilling experience for him,
Yeah.
but also a historically significant one.
Yeah.
So the will itself was this rambling justification for the war, filled with Hitler's unwavering belief in the superiority of the Aryan race.
Wow.
A document that I think really reveals the depths of his delusion and the danger of unchecked ideology.
Yeah, for sure.
It confirmed the evil that Herman had witnessed firsthand.
Right.
And really highlighted, I think, the importance of vigilance and standing up against hatred and intolerance.
It's so important.
What's even more incredible is that Herman, after the war, returned to Berlin, to his childhood city, to see the devastation wrought by the conflict.
Wow.
He described it as a wasteland.
Yeah. I can only imagine.
And his journey back to Berlin was deeply emotional. Walking through the ruins, searching for traces of his past, confronting the ghosts of his childhood. It was a real moment of reckoning for him.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And I think Herman's reflections on the psychological impact of the war on the German people are really insightful.
What did he say?
He observed this sense of collective shock and disillusionment,
Yeah.
a nation really grappling with the consequences of its choices.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and he noticed this stark contrast between the arrogance and superiority that had characterized the Nazi era and the defeated, almost hollow expressions that he saw in post-war Germany.
Wow.
It's a really nuanced perspective that I think challenges these simple notions of guilt and blame.
Right.
And it really prompts us to consider the long-term consequences of extremism and the challenges of rebuilding a society after such trauma.
And Herman's willingness to engage with those complexities, even after everything he had been through,
Yeah.
speaks volumes about his character.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's turn our attention to another incredible story of survival. Henry Glantz's journey, which is equally compelling.
Okay.
Like, Herman Henry was born in Poland, but raised in Germany. He also escaped at the age of 15, just hours before the outbreak of World War II.
Wow, just in time.
And Henry's childhood was marked by constant fear and discrimination.
Oh, gosh.
He vividly recalls the hostility he faced as a Jewish child in Nazi Germany, the taunts, the threats, the ever-present sense of danger.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine living with that kind of fear every day.
He described living in a world where simply walking down the street could be terrifying.
Yeah?
Jewish children were targeted for abuse and violence. Imagine the fear that must have been a constant companion.
Absolutely.
And so Henry's escape from Germany was this desperate scramble, or race against time,
Yeah.
as the world stood on the brink of war.
Right.
His family, realizing the danger, made that heartbreaking decision to send him away, hoping he would find safety in Britain.
Wow.
And he described those wrenching goodbyes. The uncertainty, the fear that gnawed at him
Yeah.
as he boarded the train, leaving behind everything he knew.
Yeah.
It's remarkable that children like Henry were able to endure such trauma and find the courage to keep going.
Absolutely.
Upon arriving in Britain, he was also sent to Grich Castle, which, while austere, offered refuge and a sense of community.
Did he talk about what it was like being there?
He did. He remembers the basic living conditions, the lack of privacy,
Yeah.
and the constant reminders of the war raging just beyond the castle walls.
I can only imagine.
But like Herman, he also experienced that camaraderie among his fellow kindred transport children.
Yeah.
The shared experiences that forged these bonds of friendship and support.
So important.
And so the children at Grich Castle found ways to cope with their displacement. They formed their own communities, created their own forms of entertainment, and they sought out those moments of joy in their new reality.
Yeah.
So, for example, Henry and some of the other children learned Welsh,
Oh, wow.
the language spoken by many of the locals.
Yeah.
And they saw it as a way to connect with their new surroundings, to find a sense of belonging, and to add a bit of levity to their lives.
It's really interesting.
And, their efforts to learn Welsh, in a way, symbolize their determination to adapt and to rebuild their lives.
Right.
But Henry's story, unfortunately, takes a tragic turn. After the war, he learned the devastating truth about his family.
Oh, no. What happened?
He discovered that his mother and brother had been murdered in the Majdanek extermination camp.
Oh, my gosh.
It's a stark reminder of the horrific scale of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
The systematic extermination of millions of innocent lives.
It's just unimaginable.
And the news of his family's death was a devastating blow for Henry,
Yeah.
a wound that would never truly heal. And he dedicated himself to piecing together their story, searching for any information he could find about their final days.
Wow.
And, it was a way for him to honor their memory and to ensure that their story wouldn't be forgotten.
Yeah. That's really powerful.
Yeah. And so despite the profound loss that he endured, Henry managed to build a new life for himself in Britain.
Yeah.
It's a testament to the human spirit's capacity for resilience and hope.
Yeah.
Even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, he found love, he married family, he created a family of his own.
It's an incredible story.
Yeah. And it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always that potential for healing growth and the creation of a better future.
Yeah.
It's really a testament to the strength of the human spirit.
Absolutely. And that's what's so powerful about both Herman and Henry's stories. They remind us that history is not just dates and events,
Right.
but it's a tapestry of individual lives,
Yeah.
of human experiences,
Yeah.
of both immense suffering
Yeah.
and remarkable resilience.
And we'll delve even deeper into their stories and the broader legacy of the Kindertransport in part 2 of this deep dive.
I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
So we've been talking about the remarkable story of Nicholas Winton and the Kindertransport, and it wasn't just about saving children. It was about giving them a chance at a future, a future that the Nazis had tried to take away from them.
Right. And it's estimated that around 10,000 children, mostly Jewish, were rescued from Nazi-occupied Europe through the Kindertransport.
Wow.
And they were given refuge in Britain, but they arrived with so little, carrying the weight of trauma and so much uncertainty.
Yeah, it must have been such a difficult transition, separated from their families, their homes, their culture, everything they knew, and then suddenly thrust into this new world.
Absolutely. And for many of these children, it was a really traumatic experience.
Yeah.
But despite the challenges, so many of them thrived.
Yeah.
They adapted, they learned, they built new lives for themselves, and they contributed to British society in really incredible ways. It's really inspiring to think about, they became doctors, scientists, artists, teachers, business leaders.
Exactly.
Really a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
Absolutely. The Kindertransport stands as this powerful reminder that even during the darkest times, even in the face of unimaginable evil, there are people willing to make a difference.
Yeah.
And that every single life has value. Every story deserves to be heard, and those acts of kindness can have a ripple effect that lasts for generations.
Now let's go back to the stories of Herman and Henry, our 2 Kindertransport survivors.
Okay.
We left off with Herman serving as an interrogator in the British Army during the war.
Right.
And he came face to face with the very people who had perpetrated the horrors that he escaped.
It's almost unbelievable.
I know, I can't imagine what that must have been like for him.
He described a wide range of reactions from the people he interrogated.
Okay.
Some seemed genuinely remorseful, while others remained defiant, clinging to their twisted beliefs.
It makes you wonder about the different ways people rationalize their actions, especially in such a complex and horrific situation.
It really does.
Did he give any specific examples?
He did. He mentioned one incident where he was interrogating a high-ranking German official, and when this official realized that Herman was Jewish, he demanded to be questioned by someone of a higher rank.
Wow, it's almost like something out of a movie.
I know, right?
So I'm curious, how did Herman react to that?
He had a really quick wit about him. He simply removed the official's insignia and said, "Now we are equals."
Wow, what a powerful moment.
Right.
It speaks volumes about his strength and his refusal to be intimidated.
Absolutely.
But what's really fascinating is what Herman observed about the motivations of the people who were part of the Nazi regime.
Okay, what did he say about that?
Well, he believed that many of them were drawn to the idea of power, the sense of belonging, the chance to be part of something bigger than themselves, even if that something was built on hatred and violence.
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. It makes you think about how easily people can be seduced by ideology
Yeah.
and how dangerous unchecked ambition can be.
It's a lesson that unfortunately remains relevant today,
Yeah.
as we see the rise of extremist ideologies around the world.
It's true.
And I think Herman's story reminds us that we need to understand the root causes of extremism
Right.
and actively combat prejudice and intolerance.
Absolutely. It's so important.
Now, Henry's story takes us on a slightly different path.
Okay.
He faced different challenges, particularly when he was placed in a series of foster homes after arriving in Britain.
Oh, wow.
And he ended up working on a farm, which was a far cry from the life he had known.
I can imagine.
And he talked about the difficulty of adjusting, feeling isolated and homesick, struggling to adapt to a new language and a completely different way of life.
It must have been incredibly lonely for him, especially at such a young age, being away from his family and everything familiar.
Yeah, and he did mention moments of kindness, from people who offered him support.
Yeah.
But he also spoke about the deep sense of loss he felt, the longing for his family, and the uncertainty of his future.
His story really highlights the emotional toll of displacement and the lasting impact of trauma.
Yeah, it does.
And it emphasizes the importance of providing support and resources for refugees, understanding the challenges they face and approaching their experiences with empathy and compassion.
And it also makes you think about the idea of home,
Right.
of belonging, and how those concepts can be shattered by events like war and persecution.
Absolutely.
Henry's story also sheds light on the complexities of identity,
Okay.
especially for someone navigating multiple cultures.
Yeah.
He described feeling caught between two worlds, not fully German, not yet fully British.
Right.
And it must have been a real struggle to reconcile his past with his present.
Absolutely. His experience is a powerful reminder that identity is fluid and ever-evolving,
Yeah.
shaped by our family history, our cultural background, and our personal experiences.
Yeah. And it highlights the need to create societies that embrace diversity, where everyone feels valued or respected regardless of their background.
It's about fostering a sense of true belonging.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, while the Kindertransport was a truly remarkable effort that saved thousands of lives, it's important to acknowledge that it wasn't without its limitations and challenges.
Right. It was a very selective process, with some children being chosen over others.
Yeah.
And those choices were sometimes arbitrary.
And what were the criteria for selection?
It often focused on factors like age, health, and family connections.
I see.
So some children were separated from their siblings, and others were placed in families who weren't really equipped to provide the care and support they needed.
It's heartbreaking to think about.
Yeah, and there were even instances of abuse, neglect, and exploitation,
Oh, gosh.
which really casts a shadow over the well-intentioned efforts of the rescue operation.
It's a reminder that even when we're dealing with urgent humanitarian crises, we have to strive for fairness, equity, and accountability. It's a sobering reminder that even the most noble endeavors can have unintended consequences.
Right.
We have to learn from the past to try to improve our responses to similar situations today.
It's so important to remember that.
Yeah, the Kindertransport reminds us that every child deserves protection, every person deserves dignity, and every story deserves to be heard.
I completely agree.
Let's take a step back for a moment and consider the broader historical context of the Kindertransport.
Okay.
It's important to remember the political climate of the 1930s, the rise of Nazi Germany, and the escalating persecution of Jews across Europe.
Right. The world was essentially watching as Hitler's regime stripped Jews of their rights, their property, their livelihoods, their very dignity.
Yeah, it was a systematic dehumanization that culminated in the horrors of the Holocaust.
And while the Kindertransport was an incredible act of compassion, it was a relatively small effort in the face of this global crisis.
Yeah, it raises questions about the responsibility of nations to intervene and the importance of collective action in the face of tyranny.
It's a stark reminder that silence in the face of injustice can be interpreted as complicity, and that we have a responsibility to stand up for human rights and hold those in power accountable.
But at the same time, the Kindertransport also highlights the power of individual action.
Yeah.
It shows us that ordinary people can make a difference even when governments and institutions fail to act.
That's what's so inspiring about Nicholas Winton's story.
Yeah.
He wasn't a politician or a diplomat. He was a stockbroker who saw a need and decided to do something about it.
He didn't have vast resources or political influence,
Right.
but he had compassion, he had determination, And he had a network of people who shared his vision.
It's a reminder that we don't have to wait for permission to act, that we each have the capacity to make a positive impact on the world, even if it seems like a small act.
Now, shifting our focus to the present, what are some of the key lessons we can learn from the legacy of the Kindertransport?
Well, for one, it speaks directly to the refugee crises that we see happening in the world today. It reminds us of the importance of empathy, of understanding the plight of those who are forced to flee their homes, and of offering support and refuge to those in need.
It's also a call to action,
Yeah.
reminding us that we can't just be bystanders in the face of injustice and suffering.
We have to use our voices, our resources, and our influence to advocate for those who are marginalized, persecuted, or silenced.
Yeah.
Even small acts of kindness can have a ripple effect.
And the Kindertransport also challenges us, I think, to examine our own biases,
Right.
to confront any prejudices we might hold, and to actively build bridges of understanding and empathy.
It's a reminder that diversity is a strength, not a weakness, and that we can learn so much from people who come from different backgrounds and have different experiences.
It's a powerful message about interconnectedness.
Yeah.
We're all part of the same human family.
Right.
And the well-being of one is inextricably linked to the well-being of all.
The Kindertransport was a story of immense loss,
Yeah.
but also extraordinary resilience. It's a chapter in history that compels us to confront the darkest parts of humanity,
Yeah.
while also inspiring us to work towards a brighter future.
It reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable evil, there's always hope,
Right.
the possibility of redemption, and the enduring strength of the human spirit.
But we have one more crucial aspect to consider: the emotional impact of the Kindertransport.
Okay.
The trauma, the loss, in the enduring search for healing and meaning.
Okay. And we'll explore that further in part 3 of our deep dive. We've been on quite a journey with this deep dive into the Kindertransport. A story that's both heartbreaking and incredibly inspiring. We've learned about Nicholas Winton's selfless actions, heard from Helena Bonham Carter about her personal connection to this history, and followed the journeys of 2 survivors, Herman and Henry.
Right.
And as we wrap up, it's essential to acknowledge the profound emotional impact of this whole experience. Imagine being a child, torn from everything familiar,
Yeah.
thrust into a world of unknowns, haunted by worry for the family left behind.
Right.
The psychological toll is immeasurable.
Absolutely.
It's hard to even fathom.
Yeah.
So many of these children struggled with a whole range of emotions. Abandonment,
Yeah.
guilt, grief, a profound sense of loss.
They carried the weight of unspoken trauma, the
Yeah.
memories of persecution, the fear of what might have happened to their loved ones, and even the guilt of surviving when so many others didn't.
It's heavy stuff.
It is.
And for many, these emotions didn't surface right away.
Right.
They remained buried for years,
Yeah.
sometimes triggered later in life by seemingly unrelated events.
That's the complex nature of trauma. It can
Yeah.
take years, even decades to process.
Yeah.
And healing from such an experience is a long and difficult road.
Right.
It requires patience, understanding, and a willingness to face those painful memories.
Did the Kindertransport survivors find ways to support each other through this?
They did. Support networks were crucial,
Yeah.
both within the Kindertransport community and in the broader society. Organizations like the Kindertransport Association provided a space for survivors to connect, to share their stories, and to find comfort in those shared experiences.
Yeah.
It was a way to heal together.
That makes a lot of sense. Sharing those experiences would be so important. And I imagine therapy played a role as well.
Yes, both individual and group therapy provided a safe and structured way to explore and process those traumatic memories,
Yeah.
to develop coping mechanisms, and to find ways to move forward.
Did they find other outlets, for expressing what they went through?
Many did.
Yeah.
The act of storytelling itself,
Yeah.
through memoirs, interviews, or even artistic expression,
Yeah.
became a powerful tool for healing.
Yeah.
By giving voice to their experiences, they honored the memory of those lost
Yeah.
and educated future generations about the horrors of the Holocaust and the dangers of prejudice and intolerance.
It seems like the Kindertransport is more than just a historical event.
Right.
It's a living legacy,
Yeah.
a reminder of humanity's capacity for both incredible cruelty and extraordinary compassion.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And it's a story that speaks to us today, offering valuable lessons about empathy, the power of individual action, and the need to stand up against injustice.
So as we kind of wrap up this conversation, what would you say is like the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's a call to action,
Yeah.
a reminder that we can't be passive in the face of injustice.
Yeah.
We must use our voices, our resources, and our influence to advocate for those who are marginalized and persecuted.
Yeah.
Even small acts of kindness can have a ripple effect.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that we're all interconnected.
Yeah.
What happens to one of us affects us all.
The Kinder Transport is a story of immense loss, but also extraordinary resilience. It compels us to learn from the past and to work towards a future where such atrocities are never repeated.
It's been a really powerful deep dive.
Yeah.
We've explored the historical context, the personal stories, the lasting legacy of the Kinder Transport. And I think we can all take away valuable lessons from this remarkable chapter in history.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
We hope it sparked your curiosity and maybe even inspired you to make a difference in your own way.
And remember, the fight for justice and equality is an ongoing one.
Yeah.
We must remain vigilant and committed to creating a world where every child is safe, every individual is valued, and every voice is heard.